the Shed Show is back on the road to share a story. A story that not only restores an iconic Australian motor car, but restores faith in humankind. We're in Australia's food bowl, the Goulburn Valley, just out of Shepparton in country Victoria, and it's bloody cold. Amongst the peach and pear trees sits a shed that produces the finest car builds in the world. In this shed, the body and paintwork was done on the X-Boss, arguably the greatest modified car ever built in Australia, and a Grade 8 finalist at the Detroit Motorama in the US. But right now, it's home to perhaps its most special build. Maskell's Classic Customs is in demand, usually booked out 2 or 3 years in advance, but a phone call not long ago saw them take on a project that has become inspirational.
The guys just rang me one day, John, he rang and said, wants to do a panel van. And I went, oh, sorry mate, we are booked for a couple of years, you know, flat out. We've got lots and lots to do. So what do you want to do with the panel van when it's all finished? And he said, sit in it and cry. And I went, oh, righto, now we're on a different playing field. Like all of a sudden, something's changed here. So I said, oh, so are you doing it with Luke or for Luke? And he said, oh, I'm doing it for Luke, he's passed away. So the next day is a Tuesday, we're having a smoker with the boys, and I said, righto, you guys all seen me walking around with a couple yesterday, and then, oh yeah, where's this going? You know, how much more work are you creating? And I said to the boys, look, if any one of you guys can say no to this project, I promise you I will say no to it. They're the parents of a young bloke, Luke. He passed away on the 20th of December, 4 weeks ago. And they all straight away went, we're doing it.
Well, you're not alone, Greg. You've got the best team in the country, and the outpouring of kindness has been enormous.
I posted on social media, you know, what a great honour it is, something like that, along those lines. And the next day, Adrian from KBS has sent me a message, hey Greg, any products for that job free of charge? And I'm going, mate, why? I rang him, what's going on? And he goes, I've got 2 young blokes, twins, getting their licence next month. That guy's living my worst nightmare. So then all of a sudden, another one and another one, you know, Resto Country, PPG rang. We just started getting all these people ringing saying, hey, is there anything we can do to help? You know, John and Glenda have never asked for any of this. I've never asked for any of this. Just everybody's just sort of going, hey, this is a horrible story, but we need to get some awareness out there. We want to support it, you know, and big companies. One of the guys, he supplied us with some parts and some chrome, and he said, you know, no charge. And I said, why's that? And he goes, last week my young bloke had a car accident, went through a giveaway sign, it could have been him.
What's the timeline, Greg, and where are we up to then?
We have to have it finished somewhere in November. I said to them, when do you want it back? And they said, well, the anniversary of his passing was the 20th. And I thought, I am not having that car presented to them on that day. Because it's very emotional, this whole thing, and it's a hell of a ride for them. I can't imagine what they're going through, and I don't want to ever be there. But so I said to all the guys, right, 5th of November, handover day, and it's all like, oh no. But we're doing really well. Like, we've got all the supporters have jumped on board. They've got their product in early. You know, Kev's got the chassis, motor, everything's all finished now. So the rolling body chassis is finished. The guys are full noise into the bodywork. So Resto Country's given us all these panels and parts, and so the guys have knocked that part of it over. We've got a couple of small jobs to do.
And it'd be great to share on the Shed Show socials a few of the highlights of Luke's Sandman panel van build, and perhaps highlight some dangers of fatigue, particularly with young folks, because we don't want anyone going through the heartache that Glenda, John and Lockie are going through right now.
Everybody has been so supportive. It's a great story. It's a good feeling with humanity again, you know, like everyone's been a part of it all, so we're really enjoying it, you know.
All right, I'm trying to ink this into your psyche. Make sure you like the Shed Show YouTube channel. Like and subscribe, and show us your sheds. Send the pics in. Put them up on FB and Insta. We love to see it. Make some comments, and we could be in your shed one day. We're back with more of Luke's Resto story in a moment. Shed Show. I'm heading out to Maskell's Classic Custom Shed to check out progress on Luke's PV build. Luke's parents, John and Glenda, and little brother Lockie, are heading down from Crookwell in the southern tablelands of New South Wales, a little 6-hour drive to do the same. I can't wait to meet them and find out Luke's passion for doing up cars, especially the Holden Sandman panel van that Maskell's are lovingly restoring in his honour.
After Luke passed, I just Googled a heap of bloody car, different guys, and got some names and telephone numbers and email addresses and sent a few photographs and told Luke's story, what had happened to him. And Greg was basically the first one to come back to me. And having spoken to Greg on the phone a few times initially, and then he said, come down and we'll have a yarn. So we both came down to meet Greg before Greg decided to do it, and we showed him a few photographs of the van, and Greg decided to take it on, thankfully.
He had a lifestyle, he had a dream, but he had to pay for it. So he had 2 jobs. He was also finishing his HSC, was the school captain at Trinity Catholic College in Goulburn. So he had a lot of leadership activities to
Played a lot of rugby too, didn't he?
Loved his rugby, had a beautiful Labrador whose name is Jax, who is now our legacy, which keeps us very active every day. He was a hard worker, he had a dream, and he was trying to fulfil that. And of course, working 2 jobs, having a very active social life, loving his rugby, etc. Then fatigue was the thing that killed him in the end. Is that he fell asleep at the wheel. There were signs of fatigue that we probably didn't pick up on. He wasn't good at getting out of bed in the morning, but most teenagers aren't. But that was an extended activity. He would say that he was tired. We knew that he was drinking the drinks that keep you awake, and he had some no-dos in his car, etc. So there were signs of fatigue, which we had conversations with him about fatigue, but that doesn't seem a reality to a teenager when you're having those conversations. To manipulate a car is one thing. Driving at home on the farm is another thing, but being street wise to drive a car is a very different thing. And then learning good driver behaviour, such as recognising the signs of fatigue, is something that we probably need to talk to our children more about and make them aware that this is a serious thing.
It all started with KBS Coatings. I think it's Andrew rang Greg up and said, I've heard about the van, all the coating, we'll send you some down to finish it off. And I phoned Andrew up from KBS and thanked him personally, and he said to me, John, you're living my nightmare. I have 2 sons just about to get their P's, and I don't want them to end up like your bloke. He said, yeah, you're living my nightmare. Yep.
There were still parcels coming after he died, in the post for things that he'd bought, But then, so Luke had translated his vision to John, so then John could translate it to Greg, and now Greg is interpreting it, and I think that's the beauty of the message. Isn't it? Yeah.
I can only imagine the sadness that Glenda, John and Lockie are going through right now. Luke was a legend to his mates, a lovable larrikin. He'd have a chat to anyone. He loved his sport, family and pup Jacks. He had a clear vision for his life and worked hard to fund his dreams. All that changed when Luke was tragically killed at just 18 in a single vehicle accident as a result of fatigue. Luke shared his vision for the Sandman with his dad, John, who shared it with Greg and the team at Maskell's, who are now bringing it to life in Luke's honour. Beautiful. After the break, we hit the road to find out what Luke's panel van's kind of going to look like when it's finished. The team at Maskell's are going like cut cats to try and get Luke's panel van finished for handover by November. And they couldn't do it without the kindness of suppliers and trades. And they're not too far from whacking it on the rotisserie and laying a few coats of jam. But who would have thought a work vehicle would become an Aussie cult machine? Enter the Sandman. In 1974, Holden introduced the Sandman. The shag and wagon, I had one, or sin bin, immediately hit a sweet spot for young blokes like me. By 78 though, the buzz had gone, but nowadays it's back. I'm on my way to Kyabram, to a shed that's home to a lovingly restored Holden Sandman to find out more about this Aussie legend. Shane, how are you, buddy?
Craig, nice to meet you.
Welcome to the shed, lovely to meet you too.
Thank you.
And look, I'm already impressed. I can see what's over in the rest of the shed, but we're focusing on the Sandman. Shane, thanks very much for inviting us into your shed. Greg, I asked Greg, I said, do you know anyone who's got a Sandman locally or someone who knows about Sandman? And he said, you are an expert on the Sandman and you've got a beautiful example of it sitting behind us. So,
always been a Holden man, but grew up in the 70s and they were huge on the street. You know, the sound and the sights of the vans was huge. So,
and of course they came from a culture, I don't know about you, but we used to go to the beach.
Yeah.
And, you know, you had the combis and all that sort of stuff. And then, but I think what they did was they decided, okay, there's a market here.
yes.
And so they took some parts of the Monaro,
Yep.
the HQ Monaro.
Yep.
Is there a HQ Monaro sitting over there that I'm looking at?
Yep.
Oh, I'm going to start crying, Shane. This is the best shed, I've got to tell you. And they put bits and pieces
That's right.
out of the Monaro.
Into the commercial vehicle.
So I did get that right, did I?
That's right,
I
yeah.
thought that's what happened.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it was in 74 in the HQ, which it only ran for probably 6 months, and then the HJ came and away they went, you know. And they went into WBs and they were developing a Sandman WB, but the culture was finished, it was over and never hit the streets, you know, so.
and Shane, I believe that you're Greg's go-to man with this. He's been ringing you up, getting a bit of advice, but also some parts as well.
Yeah, that's correct, yeah. I've got some leftover parts from the van, because the van's predominantly made out of new old stock parts.
So you've sourced them. What, have you been at swap meets? Or
Yeah,
you've got a
we've
few
done
buddies
that.
here and there that you ring
me
up?
and my brother have walked the swap meets and eBay for years, you know.
Because your brother's got a Sandman too, hasn't
That's
he?
right, yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, I wasn't too sure, because I don't think Greg's actually told us yet when we've been out there what colour they're actually doing Luke's panel van or his Sandman. I believe this is it.
That's correct, yeah.
This is the scheme they're
I
doing.
Sent Greg some photos of it and he goes, yeah, that's the colour we've picked for it, so. Yeah, Windsor Blue it is.
Windsor Blue, they call it like that, and the graphics and so forth exactly the same?
Yeah, as far as I know, yeah.
So this is completely, obviously it's not an original with matching numbers and so forth.
This car is.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to say, but this is your superannuation fund sitting in here and throughout the rest of the shed.
I guess so, yeah.
Now, I could be wrong here, but you tell me, what are these things going for right now? No one knows where your shed is, by the way, either, Shane. We weren't going to tell anyone.
Well, I don't really know. Look, the market's changing that rapidly. There was one sold the other day, very similar for 100,000, so.
Well, you know, I read an article, now I could be wrong, matching numbers and so forth, and with this whole pandemic thing that's going on at the moment and people sitting around can't go anywhere and they've got deep pockets, that someone in Queensland paid 800 grand for one.
Yeah, right, I don't know.
Would that be right?
No, I haven't heard that story.
No, me either. So I just think he might have been romancing his own stone. 300 or 400 is, I have read that they've gone for some of them for that amount as well. So I reckon you get your 100k pretty easy today.
Yeah, right.
But you're never selling it anyway.
No, it's not about the money.
Well, listen, while we're here, why don't we get a few little bits and pieces of specs on the thing? So what did they actually run? Was it 308 or a...
Standard, they were 253 4-speed, and then you could option up from there. So this van, it's 308, and it's a bit unusual. It's got the automatic in it, turbo 400, so it would have been ordered that way.
Oh, right, so this would have been optioned up.
This van has got every option that you could have got. It's got the bigger engine, bigger transmission, LSD, air conditioning, power steering, factory tinted windows. It was a hamburger.
I want it. Now,
800, it's yours.
of course it is. No, my wife will be really happy about that. But no, it is a
She'll be
beautiful...
living in it.
And actually, she would be too. It's worth a lot more than my house. So, and you don't drive it?
No, it's never been driven. I'll tell you the story. I bought this van in a paddock in Tungamar.
A paddock in Tungamar.
For 2 slabs, I paid for it. But this is 20 years ago.
I know it's 20 years ago.
And I wanted to build a van out of new parts. In the day, I would have loved to have bought a new van, but I was too young. So I built a new one. This van drives and feels like a brand new car. Like everything's new, genuine parts. And I just want to look at it, like, to be honest.
No, I'm happy sitting here looking at it too,
Yeah.
mate. I don't like looking at you too, but I prefer looking at that.
The intentions were never to drive it. I used to watch the way they restored the HOGTs, you know when they restored them, they do that concourse, you know, the markings. And that's how I wanted to do this van. And that's, so I've got plenty of cars to drive.
It's a beautiful example, and obviously you're mechanical. You're a mechanic by trade, are you?
Panel beater spray painter.
Panel beat, well, it's handy to be in the trade, so you can do all the work yourself, and you're obviously pretty good at what you're doing. Well, I really want to thank you for helping out with this project and also the knowledge, and it'd be great to have them two park side by side one day. You might have to bring it over to the handover when we do that at Motor Museum later on, but this is a great project. Luke was a great kid. He had a passion that John had passed down, and now that's been passed on to Greg. And to have a living memory of Luke and and something that would meant a whole lot to him and his family is going to be fantastic, and I want to thank you very much for helping out as well and being a part of it.
No worries, no, I'm grateful to be allowed to be a part of it, you know, it's excellent.
It's easy to see why the Sandman evokes so much passion and why Luke was inspired by his dad John to own his own piece of Aussie motoring history. Keep sharing Luke's story any way you can, and let's wake up, especially our young folk, to the dangers of fatigue. Well, finally there's going to be a cool head on the Shed Show. Stick around, you'll find out more next. Luke's Sandman builders really highlighted the devastating effect such tragedy can have on family and friends. It ripples out to the local communities, schools, sporting clubs and beyond. I'm on my way to have a chat with a cool head who puts those very real consequences in the spotlight for young drivers in the hope of preventing such future accidents. Whoops, looks like I've got company. I'll be with you in a tick.
You'd be used to that whiskey, wouldn't you?
Really? Glenn, good on you, mate. Thank goodness it's you.
Cheers, mate.
Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise.
Good to see you. Glenn, you head up a local police initiative called Cool Heads. Can you tell us a bit about it, mate?
Yeah, well, locally, Whiskers, we found that the 16 to 25-year-old age group of young drivers were overrepresented in our road stats. They were involved in collisions that were causing road trauma. So we thought, how can we reduce that? What can we do? And we came up with the idea of Cool Heads back in 2008. After a number of particularly nasty collisions which affected the whole community. And it's been running since then. We've had about 7,000 young drivers go before the program. But its principal reasons for its existence is we want young drivers to think, even just for a moment, if they make poor choices or they're distracted, they can be exposed to road trauma. And it's not just their lives, of course, it's their whole family and the community that's impacted by this.
Well, that's what I was going to say. At these events, you have a lot of speakers come along, and quite often those speakers are either victims or the family of victims who keep on living on from this sort of trauma.
I think a lot of young drivers don't realise what we call the ripple effect. They think it's just their life they're risking, but it's just devastating for so many different people. And often you're not actually killed with road trauma. You could just have injuries that you're going to live with for the rest of your life as well. And unfortunately, it's been too easy for us to find victims of road trauma that come along and share their stories. And the reason they do it is because they're devastated by it. They just don't want any other drivers to experience the same thing in their lives. So a lot of people are passionate about reducing road trauma in our community.
Well, it's a bit like what we're doing following Luke's panel van rebuild. His family are going through, they're one of those families that are going through this. And the reason why we're at this location today, out here at the road, out in Undira, is because a few years ago there was a very, very, very similar accident, very, very similar to Luke's, happened to him, happened right in this location, or not far from it anyway.
We had a young fella called Ross Kimberlin who lost his life just down the road from here in very similar circumstances, as you said. He had a great life, he had a lot of amazing friends, and he got fatigued and he made a small mistake. He made a very simple mistake about deciding to drive when he was fatigued, and to think about what consequences have been left for his family and the community since then is absolutely gut-wrenching. So it's one of the reasons we had Cool Heads, and it's one of the reasons I think it's great that you're sharing the story about Luke. Now,
Glenn, apart from the other thing, we're about to show something now. I feel very privileged and honoured to be able to show this. And Kevin's Kimberlin was Ross's dad. He spoke at one of these Cool Heads events, didn't he?
Yeah, well, Kevin's got a very sad story in the sense that he was a first responder. He volunteers a lot of time for the community with search and rescue and responding to road trauma. And unfortunately, on this particular night in 2009, his son was involved in a collision after being fatigued. And it's a gut-wrenching story. Kevin was incredibly brave to share it, but once again he did that at Cool Heads just so that young drivers would get the message that what are you risking when you're distracted or fatigued or make a mistake when you're driving a motor vehicle. So I congratulate Kevin on that 2012 presentation. It was amazing and incredibly courageous. And once again, we just want all these young drivers just to have a think about it just for a moment. How can I get to my destination safely and not be impacted by road trauma?
Here's a bit of a taste of this presentation, Kevin's talk.
On Saturday, he was on top of the world. On Wednesday, the 23rd, I'm at home and the CFA pager alerted me to an MVA. I look up, there's a local copper standing by the door, and he says, "I'm sorry, Kevin." I push past him, and there's Ross, and he's dead. I could hear this terrible noise. And after a bit, I realised that it was me. I was actually making that noise. I'm not sure how long I stayed at the accident. I put my head in the window, I put my arm around Ross, and I told him I loved him. I have to go home and tell my family. I can't let a stranger do this. I've been to 14 fatalities in 20 years with the Undera CFA, and I know a grieving family is a terrible thing to see. Ross wasn't drunk, and he wasn't on drugs. There was no one else involved in his accident. So on a straight stretch of road, in good weather conditions, Ross fell asleep, doing about 100 k's. He drifted off the road, he hit a tree, he died on impact or shortly after. One thing that amazes me is the little monuments that appear on the side of the road. Ross has one such monument, and friends and family go there to remember their loved one, and they tell me how peaceful it is. There is nothing peaceful at an accident. It is a place of horrendous violence, torn steel, broken bodies, shattered glass, and fear, but never ever peace. I know I have had black thoughts since he died, and I feel cheated out of something really, really wonderful. And I'll carry that with me for the rest of my life. I had hoped to leave here and leave a life lesson for you that may save you on the road. And I thought about it, and I realised I actually didn't have one. I couldn't give Ross one, and I couldn't save Ross. So I asked people I knew who were smart and caring, and they looked at me with a blank face. The reality is, the things that will kill you on the road are as individual as you. But the one thing they all have in common is they start with a bad choice. It hurts me to say Ross made a bad choice, and it did kill him. When it comes time for you to make your choices, whether to drive or not, I hope the little voice inside your head reminds you of something you saw or heard here tonight. There are no such thing as car accidents, just young people's shitty choices.
And of course, we're going to put up a little link to that whole Kevin's speech, but a lot of people didn't see it there, but he received a standing ovation at the end of that talk. All the kids, the family, the police, all the other emergency services people that were there stood up and applauded. And I'd like to applaud you too. Cool Heads is a great program, Glenn.
Whiskers.
I think it should be spread nationally, not just here, so it's a great local initiative, but really it should be spread out around the country, if not around the world.
Simple message, but very valuable.
Thanks for coming.
Always a pleasure.
That was a very powerful message that Kevin delivered at the Cool Heads presentation. If you're a young driver, or you know of any young drivers, spread the word, share the story, share the link below, watch the full Kevin presentation. We really need to get this message out and help the kids wake up to fatigue, because the grief never goes away. It may change shape, but it always stays with it. And when you think about it, grief is love with nowhere else to go.
Next time Luke's panel van gets a coat of jam and the ShedShow house band throws a leg over a song for Australia's iconic Brumpy.
ShedShow, ShedShow.